Yale Law just lost the #1 spot for the first time in 36 years. Berkeley and Georgetown are out of the top 14, and there is no school ranked 14th. The T14 is dead, and I'm going to show you exactly what killed it. Now, Stanford is #1, Chicago and Yale are tied at 2, Penn and UVA are tied at 4, Harvard at 6, Duke and NYU at 7, Columbia, Northwestern, and Michigan in a three-way tie at 9, Vanderbilt at 12, Cornell, UCLA, and WashU tied at 13. We've got 15 law schools in the top 13, no school ranked 14. Berkeley and Georgetown are out at 16 and 18, respectively. Last year, there were 17 schools in the T14 because of a four-way tie at 14. This year, 15 schools in the top 13 with no 14 at all. The year before that, Georgetown was out. Before that, they were in. Cornell was out last year, back in now. UT Austin was in last year, back out now. A whole big mess, right? When I started teaching the LSAT in 2005, the T14 was treated like constitutional law. The whole point was supposed to be that these 14 schools would never change. That's what made it useful. You could say T14 and everyone knew exactly what it meant. 14 schools with elite national placement locked in for decades. Now that stability is gone. If the T14 changes every single year, it's not the T14 anymore, right? It's just a list. So it's time we stopped pretending otherwise. Now, 3 things killed the T14: a broken formula, a mass boycott, and schools gaming the system. Let's start with the formula. US News normalizes 198 law schools onto a 0 to 100 scale and rounds to whole numbers. When they added Puerto Rican law schools a few years ago, schools that tend to score very low on the metrics, it compressed the entire top. Nearly 200 schools squeezed into about 70 scoring slots, so ties become inevitable. Nebraska, Wayne State, and Richmond all moved up exactly 9 spots this year. All were tied at 71 before. Now they're all tied at 62. 3 unrelated schools in 3 different markets achieving identical gains. That's not measuring anything, really. That's just a rounding error. And at the top, the compression is even worse. Yale's employment rate dropped from 95.5 to 94.9%. That is 0.6 of a point. And that alone was sufficient to end a 36-year streak at #1. Berkeley's dean said it plainly. The change reflects shifts in the formula, not any meaningful change at the school. The formula also treats all full-time legal jobs equally. A public defender making $55,000 counts the same as a first-year associate making $350,000. If they were to separate big law and federal clerkships from other employment, which they should, half the absurdities in this list would disappear overnight, but they don't. That's why USC, which has 57% big law placement, sits at 26, while schools with far lower big law rates rank above them. Then there's the boycott. A few years ago, Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, Georgetown, and other top schools flat out refused to participate. They said the methodology was hurting diversity and affordability. So in response, US News overhauled the formula because they want the schools to participate, but the new formula is actually worse, not better. And this year, only 4 of the top 18 law schools even certified their data: Chicago, Vanderbilt, WashU, and UT Austin. The rest, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, Penn, Virginia, Duke, NYU, Columbia, Berkeley, Georgetown, Cornell, and UCLA, they all opted out. Now, if you don't certify, your faculty cannot participate in the peer assessment survey, which is 12.5% of the total ranking. And so a major chunk of the formula is being shaped without input from most of the best schools in the country. The 4 schools that certified all rose in their rankings or held their spot. Every single school that boycotted either dropped in the rankings or stayed flat. And so you could decide whether that's a coincidence or not. Then finally, you've got the schools gaming their metrics. Vanderbilt keeps their class size tiny, about 500 students total across all 3 years. When applications surged, they actually shrank their class to protect per student employment percentages. That's smart for students, but also a direct rankings play. Georgetown does the opposite. They've got a huge class and they take in a ton of transfers from lower ranked schools. And so for them, their top of class outcomes are outstanding, but the large denominator drags down their percentages. Same quality of education, same alumni network. Georgetown's at 18, Vanderbilt's at 12. No real difference in quality necessarily, it's more just the arithmetic. Now, US News claims the LSAT and GPA are only 9% of their formula, but that number is actually misleading. Because if you look at bar passage rates, for example, which is 25% of the rankings, that follows LSAT and GPA directly. In other words, LSAT and GPA are predictors of bar passage rates. They are strongly correlated with bar passage rates, and so they're not independent metrics. Employment, which is 33% of the rankings, follows 1L grades. Basically, you got good 1L grades, you have better employment outcomes. But LSAT, again, predicts 1L grades, so again, tied to LSAT. And big law firms, strangely, literally ask for your LSAT score during on-campus interviews. You could argue whether they should or not, but bottom line is they do, and so LSAT also predicts employment. Then peer assessments, which are 12.5% of the ranking, they're driven by a school's median LSAT score. Because deans filling out surveys judge schools by their numbers, so it's kind of circular. So if you add all that up, bar passage, employment, peer assessments, all of that together, 92% of a school's ranking is directly or indirectly driven by LSAT and GPA. Now, here's what that means in practice. When a school raises its LSAT median by 2 points, it doesn't just get a small bump from the 5% LSAT weight. As a result of a higher LSAT median, they have better bar passage rates, better employment numbers, better peer assessment score as well. And then the school jumps up 6 spots. So that's not 6 different things improving. That's one number, the LSAT score, rippling through the entire formula. And the remaining sliver, not dictated by LSAT and GPA, that's talking about library resources. Literally 2% of your school's ranking is how many librarians they employ per student in 2026, when every piece of legal research happens on a screen. Now, I've been doing the LSAT for 20 years. Not one student has ever mentioned library staffing as being important to them. Don't know why it's in the rankings. And so if the T14 is dead, the question becomes, does that mean there's no hierarchy at all? No, there absolutely is one, of course. But it's not a hard cutoff at 14. It's a spectrum. And that is determined by the people who actually hire lawyers, not US News. Now, of course, hiring partners don't track the rankings. Most of them couldn't even tell you what their own school is ranked at. But they do have a general mental map of this, right? So they're looking at Yale at the top, Stanford, Harvard, Chicago next, then Columbia, NYU, and Penn, then UVA and Duke, then Berkeley, Michigan, and Northwestern, then Cornell, then Georgetown. Something roughly along those lines. And that map has been stable for decades, didn't change today, not changing because of a magazine formula. And the lines between those groups are blurry, they're not clear. The difference between a school at the bottom of one tier and the top of the next is essentially nothing. There's no cliff at number 14 where elite suddenly becomes non-elite, and there never was. The T14 just made people believe there was. I mean, think about it this way. Would you rather be at the top of your class at the school ranked 15th or at the bottom of your class at a school ranked 13th? And that question matters way more than which side of an imaginary line these schools sit on. But the T14 mentality made people unable to even think that way. The real question was never, is this school in the T14? The real question is, what are the outcomes for students at my position in the class, in the market where I want to practice? So let's talk about what actually matters in terms of the numbers. Cornell, 72% big law. Berkeley, 61% big law plus federal clerkships. Georgetown, 59% big law and such. But you got to consider context as well. Yale's big law rate is going to be lower than Cornell's because Yale students choose clerkships, academia, and public interest at significantly higher rates. Berkeley students self-select into the Bay Area. Now we got to consider that when 50% of a class goes to big law because 50% want big law, that's totally different than 50% going into big law because only 50% can. So choices versus access. You also got to consider the geographic footprint of a school. You want to look at where the school's reputation is in their region. So for example, University of Minnesota is ranked lower than UChicago, but if you want to go to practice in Minnesota, maybe Minnesota's a better school to go to if you don't want Chicago big law. You want to look at placement data for jobs broken down by market before you choose a school. And if career services won't give you the data, that's your answer right there. And I know when it's coming to choosing a school, it's a stressful decision. You're making one of the biggest financial decisions of your life. And US News just kind of scrambled the information you were relying on. So I want to make it simpler. Forget the T14. There are three things you want to look at. First, big law plus federal clerkship rate over the course of 3 years, adjusting for class size and self-selection. Second, you want to look at debt at graduation, not the sticker price. You want to look at your actual number that you're paying, tuition plus living expenses minus scholarships times 3 years. A full ride at a school ranked 20th beats $250,000 in debt at a school ranked 8th for the vast majority of people. Debt will control the first decade of your career. You also want to look at geographic placement. Where do graduates actually end up? If 80% stay in one region and it's not where you want to go, that overrides any ranking. You also want to look at bar passage rate, especially outside the top 20. 97% bar passage versus 85% is a significant difference in outcomes. You also want to look at specialty strength because, for example, different schools have different areas of specialization, different job placement rates. So, for example, Berkeley is great for tech and environmental law. NYU is great for tax law. Georgetown and UVA open doors in DC litigation. A school ranked 30th with a top 5 program in your area might be the best choice you could make. And then there's your LSAT score. 92% of these rankings are driven by LSAT and GPA. That is how the entire system works. Your LSAT score is the single most controllable lever you have. 3 more points on the LSAT could be worth $100,000 in scholarship money. And so, while everybody else argues about whether WashU belongs at 13, you should focus on what will actually change your life. Now, if you've already gotten in and a school you're considering just dropped, this is a great time to negotiate. Schools are going to worry about keeping you. They're going to offer you more money. And if a school has increased in the rankings, then of course you might have lost some leverage. So keep that in mind when you're making these decisions. Now, the T14 was useful back in the day when it was stable. It gave people a simple shorthand for elite schools that never really changed, but that is not true anymore. As a result of US News chasing the clicks, they're changing the formulas every single year to change the school's rankings. They are basically engineering outcomes, and so schools are bouncing in and out of the rankings every year. The formula is now broken, and most elite schools won't even participate anymore. And so the concept of the T14 has become a distraction from what actually determines your career, your skills, your debt, your market, your LSAT score, and what you do within the opportunities you earn. From now on, I recommend you think about law schools the way people who hire lawyers actually think about them, as a spectrum of outcomes, not some magic cutoff at 14. To speak frankly about this, I think the rankings are dumb. And rankings from a magazine that no one cares about for any other reason are especially dumb. They are the last artifact of a world that does not exist anymore. A world where prestige was gated, information was scarce, and a single list defined your future. But that world is gone. You can easily access the data for yourself in the American Bar Association 509 reports. You can look at the above the law rankings. You can look at LSD law. Great sites to get more useful information without all the spin. And so what matters for you going forward is get the highest possible LSAT score, get into better law schools, get more scholarship money. If you'd like my help getting the best possible LSAT, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. That is an open offer, by the way, for anybody watching this now or later. I do see some questions here in the chat. I will get to as many of them as I possibly can. Just keep dropping them in. I see Anon is asking, would you agree that although these rankings are not the end-all be-all, they do mean something? I think they mean less than they have ever meant at any point in history. And so I don't think you need to focus on them specifically. Of course, broadly speaking, prestige matters, but a school's specific ranking doesn't really matter a whole lot. If anything, hiring managers' understandings of the rankings and prestige are quite dated. And so that's why I was talking about how they think about them in clusters in a sense, right? So even though Yale dropped this year, they're probably going to still think of Yale as being number one. Even though Georgetown and Berkeley both dropped out of the T14 this year, of course, they're still quite well regarded, but they're clusters. It's a spectrum. Going to any school in the top 15 or 16 or so will probably get you pretty good employment outcomes, but it will typically make more sense to go to a slightly lower ranked law school with more scholarship money than going to a school a couple of ranks higher with less scholarship money. So prestige matters, but I don't think that means the rankings themselves matter a whole lot, especially not year to year. If you wanted to look at a 3-year rolling average or a 5-year rolling average, that might be a better indication upon which to get a sense of a school's prestige. I see Roni's asking, I applied to a school right before the priority deadline in February, only heard crickets. Can I email them? Yes, you can, and you should, in fact. There is something called a letter of continued interest that you can send. Basically, you send a letter or an email reiterating your interest in attending that particular school. Say, hey, Yale, hey, Harvard, hey, Stanford, you're still my number one choice, would love to go. Here's a quick update on what I've been up to since I last communicated with you, since I applied before. Don't be creepy, don't be stalkerish, of course, but follow up with them. That's totally fine to do. Snowless asks, I want to study bird law. Any recommendations? Watch Always Sunny in Philadelphia. That's the best source on bird law. Got a question from Rafa asking, I have a 180, 393 GPA, only got into USC. Every top 14 waitlisted me except Harvard, Yale, Stanford. Should I reapply? Yeah, well, I mean, your stats are pretty awesome, frankly. If you have a 180 and a 393 GPA, that should be sufficient to get into some of the T14. I mean, things have been brutal this application cycle just because of lots of applicants, of course. I would have expected you to have better outcomes overall. But yeah, reapply. I think your numbers are strong enough that you might have just had bad luck this cycle, and it's worth reapplying. I wonder if there was something else about your application that might have been weaker than it could have been. So I'm wondering about your application, essays, resume, letters of rec. Were those as strong as they could have been, or was anything lacking there? Macron's asking, why do you think more people are asking for accommodations? Because they want to get better LSAT scores. It's as simple as that. More people are aware that accommodations are available. More people are aware that LSAC is more likely to say yes than ever before. And so more people are asking because they know they're going to get. And accommodations raises LSAT scores. So in other words, some people are gaming the system because it's possible to game it. Of course, there are also more people who legitimately need accommodations who are seeking them out, but the growth in accommodated test taking is so extreme that I can't help suspecting that some of those applications are a bit fishy. I hear directly from students that they are getting more time than they think they need, but they're taking it because they can get it. Braden asks, in your view, what is the best way to fix this seemingly broken ranking system? I think the best way to fix it is to create alternatives that are more appealing. And so, in other words, pay less attention to what US News does and pay more attention to alternative sources of rankings and outcomes data. So I mentioned a couple of them. You've got, aside from US News, you've got Above the Law rankings, which are more outcomes focused. You've got LSD Law, which contains user submitted content on decisions. You've got the American Bar Association 509 reports directly. Those are all great sources of getting unfiltered data. Like I said, I think that US News is a relic of a time when people were not as savvy about hunting down the information for themselves. And so people would just kind of outsource their decision-making to this list, for 36 years. But back in the 90s, people weren't going on the American Bar Association website. I mean, it barely even existed, right? So now that we're in 2026, when people can just seek out the data themselves, why do you need the intermediary? If the vast majority of US News rankings are based on publicly available data anyway, and now you can go to the publicly available data, just go to it. Go on the American Bar Association website. Look at the 509s directly. You don't need US News anymore. Hey, Leonardo, what's up? I see Taylor's asking, I started studying for the LSAT last month. Do I still have time to take it and apply for fall 2027? Yeah, you totally have enough time. The LSAT's offered 8 times a year. Coming up, we got beyond April in a week or so. You've got June, August, September, October, November. You could take the LSAT any one of those dates and apply to law school this fall. to start law school in fall 2027. In other words, applications to start in 2027 have not even opened yet. They're opening in September of 2026. And so ideally, if you can knock out the LSAT sometime between now and September, which would be April, June, or August LSATs, you can apply as soon as applications open. So you are right on time. In fact, you're even early. I see a question asking, do I have a chance at law school with a 3.0 GPA? Frankly, a 3.0 GPA is weak. I'm probably not surprising you by telling you that, but the big missing piece of the puzzle is the LSAT, right? So if we look at the GPA in isolation, your odds are bad. If we balance it out with a killer LSAT score, your odds become a lot better. So a 3.0 sounds bad until you say 3.0 GPA plus 175 LSAT. Now your odds just got a lot better. So the question is, how do you get the 175 LSAT? And the question I would have then is, okay, well, if that is your end goal, if you want a 175 plus as a splitter applicant, balancing out a lower GPA with a higher LSAT score to get the best possible outcomes, can you work backwards from the end goal to say, what would I need to do today in April to get to a 175 by, say, August or September? You've got 4 to 5 months, plenty of time to get a top LSAT score. Let's make it happen, right? And so if you want some support, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally. The link to book that free tutoring is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. That is an open offer, by the way, for anybody watching this now or later. The one asks, does URM status matter specifically for Latino Americans? And so by URM, I'm guessing you mean underrepresented minority, essentially asking whether affirmative action is still being practiced. I mean, hypothetically, race-based affirmative action would apply for any underrepresented group, including Latinos, including Black, Hispanic, and so on, Native American, and so on. The thing, though, is that the Supreme Court banned race-based affirmative action a couple of years ago, right? And so the question is, are law schools still practicing affirmative action? That is an open question without a clear answer. As we speak, the federal government is investigating right now whether colleges and universities are still practicing it. There are some lawsuits in the pipeline related to this in the med school space. The government's asking some tough questions. Universities don't necessarily have great answers to these, and so we'll see what happens. The question is maybe that they are still violating the Supreme Court ruling, so we will see what happens. I'll have more for you on that tomorrow. Reese asks, how much do you study before taking the LSAT? I'm taking it in September. So I guess the question is, how much should you study, right? And my answer would be the more the better. You're saying you want to do the best the first time and you're nervous. You've been taking practice tests. Okay, good. So you want to do the best you can. You've been taking practice tests. Just like an Olympic athlete, there's no one answer. The question is, do more. My recommendation is do more. If you want a top LSAT score, if you want to achieve your fullest potential, get, say, a 175 plus top 1%, you've got to study differently than the other 99%. Your competition is giving it their all. And so are you going to give it your all as well? You got to fight fire with fire here if you want a top score. And so putting in 5-10 hours a week may not be enough considering what the competition's doing. And so the question becomes, can you carve out at least 2 to 3 hours a day, 5-6 days a week? If you can do more, do more. If you're working full-time or you're in school full-time, of course, there are natural limits. I don't want you to burn yourself out. But if you have the leisure to study full-time, if not now, then maybe over the summer, or give it your all on weekends, then take advantage of that time. And taking practice tests is great, but it's not enough. You also want to build a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. You want to work on your pacing and time management, doing individual sections as well. And of course, you want to review your full-length exams in depth. And if you're not sure how to review your mistakes, if you're not doing that at all, you're leaving points on the table. So I would recommend adopting a framework like the Socratic review method. It's the cornerstone of my courses and my coaching programs. The idea being, we want to get down to the root cause of what you're getting wrong and why you're getting it wrong so that you can avoid making the same mistake again. Because if you're just looking at the answer key and saying to yourself, oh, I get it now, how could I have been so dumb? You may just end up making the same mistakes again, and that's a huge waste of time. Because the LSAT repeats itself. It's the same different concepts, same different argument structures with different window dressing on top. Key the Dream is asking, what school would you go to? Solid question. I would go to the best law school possible where I could get significant scholarship money or maybe a full ride. So there is not one single law school I would choose to go to. I would look at ROI, minimizing debt and maximizing employment outcomes. And so you could imagine a spectrum where some schools give you a full ride but have pretty poor outcomes. Some schools give you a full ride and have better outcomes. Some schools might not give you quite a full ride, but give you significant scholarship money with still pretty solid outcomes. And so you want to get the best combination of minimal debt and maximal scholarship combined with good bar passage rates and good employment outcomes. And then you decide how willing you are to take on potentially a tiny bit of debt or a tiny loan, or you say to yourself, you know what, I don't want to spend a dime. I want to get a full ride plus living stipend, room and board covered. If that's you, fantastic. But it's a negotiation, and there's 198 ABA approved law schools. Some are better than others. I could imagine a world in which you want to go into big law and you said to yourself, you know what, I'm willing to go to a top 14 law school and pay a decent chunk of change for it. For other folks, you want to do public interest, government work, and so on. And maybe in those cases, you're willing to go to a lower ranked law school and get more scholarship money. So it depends what you want to do with your degree. That will dictate how much you should be willing to spend for your tuition. But of course, the route to getting the best outcomes comes down to the same thing. It's your LSAT score and it's your GPA. And the thing is that your GPA is probably pretty fixed at this point in time, but your LSAT score, you've still got a lot of room to move the needle on that. And it's kind of crazy how a single day, 2.5 hours taking the LSAT is going to weigh more heavily than your entire undergraduate career combined. But that's just the game that we're playing right now. And so you think to yourself, can I study for the LSAT and take it again in June or in August and get a higher score? If so, that's the best route to go. And that's going to make a bigger difference than polishing your resume or your personal statement for the 10th time. Gavin's asking, is it smart to pivot careers, go to law school, considering the economy and the new impact of AI? It's a good question. A lot of folks are asking these days. I've done a lot of videos recently on the YouTube channel talking about the impact of AI on the legal profession. I actually did a pretty in-depth video on this topic on Friday. I think it was Friday. If you go to the link in my bio and go to the YouTube channel, you'll see the live tab there where I have the recording about why the people telling you not to go to law school may be wrong about that, because AI will essentially, in my analysis, it will reduce the cost of legal work, which will then increase the demand for legal work. In other words, as the cost of legal work decreases and it becomes more accessible to take on lawyers, because lawyers can do more work, they're more efficient, they can offer services for cheaper, that will increase demand for legal services. And as a result, you will see an explosion in demand for legal work. And each attorney will become more efficient as a result. That's one potential way things could play out. And then additionally, you got to consider that a lot of industries are being disrupted by AI. Law is not the only one. The question is, what unique value add can you bring to the table in terms of both your ability to make use of AI, plus the unique human element you bring to the table in terms of people skills, negotiation, relationships, ability to generate business. That's a lot more meaningful than drafting contracts, which are boilerplate anyway. I mean, LegalZoom's been around for, what, a decade at least, right? And that's had an impact on things in terms of the bottom of the ladder there, but there's still a lot of higher level work that you could be doing. Leonardo's saying, I just had my first tutoring session with Jolie. It went very, very good. Awesome. So Leonardo just joined the program, had his first tutoring. Glad it went well for you. That's fantastic to hear. Derek's asking, I want to take the LSAT this year, and the international LSAT for the current year ends, and the new one might be October, which I'm not sure, but is October the best for test taking? Okay, so if I understand correctly, you're taking the LSAT outside North America, and you're asking which LSAT test date is best. So the LSAT is offered in October for international test takers, but no one LSAT test date is better or worse than another. They're all equal in difficulty. The LSAT's offered 8 times a year. We've got January, February, April, June, September, August, September, October, November. Out of those 8 test dates, I think only 4 of them are offered to those outside North America. October is one of those dates, but no LSAT is easier or harder than another. They're all meant to be equal in difficulty. And so the real answer is take the LSAT whenever you think that you can get a great score. Whenever you're scoring at or above your goal score, that's a good time to take it. And so the question becomes, when will you have the time to adequately study for the LSAT between now and your target test date? And so if you're aiming for October, you've got 6 months. Can you give it your all over these next 6 months to achieve your fullest potential? If so, October is a good date. I see Leonardo's got a follow-up saying, I want to start law school in 2027. I've been studying for 2 weeks now. Is it worth taking all 3 LSATs, June, August, and September? Or should I skip June? Willing to go to any law school, even one that's low ranked. Okay, so 3 LSATs you're considering, June, August, and September. I generally do recommend taking the LSAT more than once for the simple reason that law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take into consideration the highest score on your record, which means there is no downside to retaking the LSAT. If you do worse on a retake, no big deal. Your higher score previously still counts. If you do better, great. You've now got a higher score on your record. Now, should you take all 3, June, August, and September? If, as June approaches, you are not scoring at or above your goal score, not a whole lot of reason to take the June LSAT. Of course, you could take it and cancel, but there are limits on how many times you could take the LSAT, and law schools will assume a cancellation was not a great score. Now, will they care? Not so much. But then let's say something goes wrong in August with a bad proctor or a tech issue. Then you've got 2 cancellations. And so for that reason, I would say don't take it unless you have a reasonable expectation you'll hit your goal or close to it. So see where your practice tests are as June approaches, and then you can make a more informed decision. You can withdraw from June up till the day before, and law schools will never even know that you were signed up for the June LSAT. Now, the fact that you said you're willing to go to any law school, even one low ranked, makes me think, well, maybe you don't need as high an LSAT score. But then I disagree with that framing because a higher LSAT score will still get you more scholarship money. So even if you're willing to go to a low ranked school, if for any reason you care about getting scholarship money, which most folks do, I would say we still want you to get a great LSAT score because it could get you a full ride at a low ranked law school. Maybe you want to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money rather than a higher ranked school with less scholarship money, which is totally fine. A lot of folks go that route, as they should. But I still see it as my role to get you the best possible LSAT score to maximize your options upon applying and seeing what comes back at you. So we'll see where you are as things get closer. Of course, I'll be in touch with Jolie as well, your tutor, and see how things are progressing. But feel free to reach out with any follow-ups, of course. User 4727 is asking, if I take the LSAT in August and haven't started studying, how many hours should I study per week? As many as you can without burning out. We've got 4 months. You're just getting started now. I typically find that you want to give it ideally 4 to 5 months to achieve your fullest potential, but that requires putting in the time. I would ideally want you putting in at least an hour or 2 per day on weekdays, more on the weekends, assuming that you're busier during weekdays, but we're looking at roughly 10, 15, maybe 20 hours a week. Depends on your goals as well, of course, depends on your starting point. To improve 20 points takes more work than improving 10 points. But of course, regardless, putting in more time is going to get you better outcomes. I see Gavin's asking about what kind of prep we offer. And so at LSAT Unplugged, we offer custom coaching programs, private one-on-one coaching, custom study plans, on-demand courses, small group coaching as well. We like to personalize every program for the individual student, considering where you're at right now, your goal score, and your time frame. And so if you want to talk through the options, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. Links in my bio. Happy to talk you through the options and customize them to meet your needs and your goals to get you there on your time frame. Simply saying, I got a 142 this cycle, was rejected by 3 schools, waitlisted by 1. I mean, a 142 is a below average score, so I'm not surprised to hear that. The question is, how can we raise your LSAT score to get you better outcomes if you were to reapply next cycle? Or you could even retake the LSAT now to help you get off the wait list. Of course, things are a little bit tight for the end of this cycle, but if you're willing to reapply for next cycle with a higher LSAT score, you could have much better outcomes next time. In terms of what kind of scores you need to get in to get a full ride, it's relative to the schools you're applying to. So every law school has different requirements based on their medians. So you could look up the medians, LSAT score, median GPA of any given law school in the country on the American Bar Association website. Google X Law School 509, and you'll see what kind of numbers you want to hit based on last year's metrics, and you'll get a sense of what you'll need to be competitive. The way I think about it is this. I mean, if you want to get in, you want to be above the median. If you want to get in with scholarships, you want to be above the 75th percentile, ideally, considering that the numbers get higher and higher every single year. So what you'll need this year is different than what last year's students needed. And so if you want to get a full ride, ideally you are above the LSAT and GPA median, above the LSAT and GPA 75th percentile on both of those metrics. If you're below on one, you want to be that much higher on the other to compensate. And the reason we focus on LSAT is because GPA is pretty fixed, but still plenty of room to improve your odds with the LSAT by retaking it. And if you want to talk through the retake options, you could book the free tutoring with me. Links in my bio. I do these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, IG. Wherever you're watching this, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. So I do appreciate your support in spreading the word. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, all the best.